Today I'm reviewing the Razer Viper V2 Pro to the Logitech G Pro X Superlight. My production value is going to be a little scuffed here, so I do apologize for that. Before we get into this review, I do want to say that mice are personal preference. Things that I like may not be something that you like, so I want you to keep up your own tally of what you think is better by yourself, because you're not always going to agree with me. I'm going to try to be as objective as I possibly can, but without further ado, let's get nerdy. Starting off with the sensor, the Viper V2 Pro has a dramatically better sensor. It's got the Focus Plus Pro compared to Hero 25K. So the Viper V2 Pro has 30,000 DPI compared to 2,500 and 600 DPI. The reason why this is actually important is higher DPI. Most people are like, well, nobody's going to use 30,000 DPI or 25,000 DPI. And you would be correct. However, what you're not thinking about is that if you think of this as an actual image that's 30,000 pixels compared to an image that's 25,000 pixels, the 30,000 pixel image is going to be finer when you're actually looking. If you zoom way in on that picture and you're going pixel by pixel, 30,000 pixel image is going to give you better results than 25,000. That also relates to mice, as it is technically a sensor that is reading things. So the sensor having more dots per inch is actually going to give you more accuracy even when you're at 800 DPI or 1000 DPI. So just something to keep in mind, that higher DPI actually does translate to lower DPI by it being more accurate. The Hero sensor also has 400 IPS compared to 750 IPS, and then 70G acceleration compared to 40G acceleration. And then I want to say that I read somewhere that the resolution accuracy, and it's been a long time, so don't totally quote me on this, but I think the resolution accuracy on the Hero sensor is 98%, where it's 99.8% on the Viper V2 Pro. Last, the Viper V2 Pro also has something called asymmetric cutoff, which allows you to adjust liftoff and landing distance, which you can actually see in Razer Synapse. If I go into here and I go into the calibration, I can actually adjust the liftoff distance to be a whole bunch of different values, and I can also adjust the landing distance to be a whole bunch of different values, which makes it so you can really fine tune your liftoff distance. I know a lot of people are really picky about this, which is something that I think the Viper V2 Pro does better than any other mouse on the market. Additionally, you have something called smart tracking, which means you have consistent liftoff distance no matter the surface that you're using it on. The Viper V2 Pro, you can actually even use on glass and it'll stay consistent. So it doesn't matter what trackpad or what surface you're using, the Razer Viper V2 Pro is always going to have consistent liftoff distance. Last, it has something called motion syncs, which syncs the signals being sent to your computer and the signals that are being read, which gives you the most up-to-date positioning, which means that the Viper V2 Pro is going to feel a lot more accurate in games for tracking and everything like that than the Hero sensor. Don't get me wrong, the Hero sensor is a fantastic sensor, probably the third best sensor on the market. So it's one of those that the sensor-wise, I'm giving the win to the Viper V2 Pro. It's one of those that I can easily feel it in game. The sensor is dramatic in a completely different league than the G Pro X. Will most people actually be able to tell that? I think you will, but is it going to be worth the trades for other things? I don't know. So I'm not saying that you should prioritize sensor, but it is definitely better on the Viper V2 Pro. Moving on to the weight, it's actually going to be a draw because the Razer Viper V2 Pro is going to be 59 grams or 58. If you have the black version, it's 58. If you have the white version, it's 59, because the coating actually adds a gram of weight, where with the Logitech G Pro X, it's going to be 59 grams without the puck in it, because I don't use the puck, and it's going to be less than 63 grams even if you have the puck. So it's one of those that is pretty much watch, because you're not going to be able to notice that difference. So it's a tie there. However, one thing that people tend to underlook is the balance between both of those, of how the weight is balanced on it. And the G Pro is very well balanced as well, but it's one of those on the top there, it is very back heavy. When you go in the middle, it's perfectly balanced, and then when you go in the back, it's kind of heavy as well, where it goes towards the top. With the Viper V2 Pro, I would actually say that it's a little more balanced all around, where it's one of those, the back does give a little bit of going down, but not nearly as much as it does with the G Pro. So it's one of those that it's less on the back, and then even if I go into the front, it does a little bit less too, but I would say that's about equal on both of them. No, it's worse on the G Pro, and then the middle, of course, is perfectly balanced. So I would actually say that this is a better balanced mouse than this guy. I think part of that reason, because you have charging pins, you have the actual part where you can put in the dongle for the G Pro X. That's completely missing on the V2 Pro. So it's one of those that some people are going to like that this has that. So you are trading, and I'll discuss that stuff a little bit later. Moving on to the switches, the Razer Viper V2 Pro has Razer's 3rd gen optical switches, which are rated for 90 million clicks, 0.2 millisecond response time, and are 3 times faster than traditional mechanical switches. They are also immune to to double clicks and have 0 debounce delay. So it's one of those that objectively, if you're looking for speed, they're going to be better than the G Pro X that has 20 mil Omrons in them. However, this that are mechanical, which can develop double clicks, the 20 mil Omrons are better than the 50 mil Omrons that used to be in the G Pro wireless. So it's one of those that you're not running into double clicks as often with this guy, but you can still get double clicks, and it does need a debounce delay too, so it's going to be slower on the response time as well. The other thing too with click latency, technically the click latency is going to be better on this guy. However, Logitech has some of the lowest click latency in the business, so it's one of those that the difference between click latencies isn't going to be as big here. However, when you incorporate the sensor and the optical switches and the latency and all of that, it all adds up to be a lot more consistent, where this feels like it's literally attached to your brain, where it's not as attached to your brain with the G Pro X. However, once again, very, very close. However, with that said, mouse clicks are very personal, and they're going to, I think, are one of the main factors that will make or break somebody's decision on getting a mouse. I think both of these guys have incredibly crisp clicks. It's one of those that I actually think the V2 Pro has better than the G Pro X. I'll be showing that off here in a second, but I just want to finish one other point. The Logitech G Pro has the most consistent clicks I've ever seen on anything ever, because they actually use something called the click tensioning system, and that is a system that allows Logitech to fine-tune their clicks to, one, have left and right click be exactly the same, and then have the same pre and post travel, or at least that's the theory, and for the most part that works really well, and that's why so many people love Logitech mice. Is that click tensioning system is it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Razer Viper V2 Pro is one of those that the clicks are a little more they're not as consistent on all the copies, so it's one of those that it's hit and miss. A lot of people still aren't a fan of optical switches because they like the feel of mechanical switches better. Looking a little bit closer at both of these switches, the Razer Viper V2 Pro has mild pre-travel, and I would say mild, maybe moderate post-travel if I'm really squeezing hard. Both left and right click are very consistent in feel. However, my left click does sound a little bit different than my right click, which is super common on pretty much every single mouse that I own, so I'm not saying that's a negative, but it is one of those things. Also, when it comes to side play, I have very little. I mean, I'm really cranking on this guy to try to get that to move at all, and it's barely moving. Looking at the actual clicks, there's mild pre-travel, moderate post-travel. I guess you could argue mild pre or post travel with a very crisp click on both of them. Both clicks feel exactly the same. However, there is a bit of audible difference between the left and right click, which, like I said in previous reviews, is pretty normal. For the Superlight, it's one of those I would say that has quite a bit of play and isn't too hard to actually do. So this has more play than the Viper V2 Pro, where if I'm really cranking on this guy, I really can't get it to move anywhere. And in general, that tends to be the consensus that I'm seeing in other reviews as well. So it's one of those, I have very little side-to-side play, and the actual crispness of this click is really good. It's one of those that I think that it actually feels more crisp than my Logitech G Pro, but they're very close. It's hard to declare a winner when it comes to the crispness, but I would say just a little bit to the Viper V2 Pro. Again, that's going to vary a lot depending on the mouse version that you get, because just variance is a thing, and some clicks are going to be better than others. So I would say both of these clicks are excellent, or hard to beat for both of them. As for the side clicks, the Superlight sticks out quite a bit, but not a whole lot compared to the Viper V2 Pro. I think it sticks out a little bit more. When I actually press these, it's one of those mild pre-travel, moderate post-travel if I'm really pressing, but I would say mild pre and post-travel for both, with a very crisp click for the Viper V2 Pro, where when it comes to the Superlight, it's one of those I would say that it's got moderate pre-travel with mild post-travel and kind of almost a mushy or very soft crisp click. You can still feel a click, but it feels a little bit more mushy for both of those, where with the Viper V2 Pro definitely is a crisper click. Also one of those that you can roll click on both of them or dedicated click for either one. Same with this guy, you can roll click nice and easy for either one of those, or dedicated click. I would give the win to the Viper V2 Pro in the sense of just feel for the side clicks. Moving on to the scroll wheel, the Superlight has it has dedicated steps, but I would say that the Viper has more dedicated steps, and I would say less of them. So there's more of them on the Viper V2 Pro compared to the Superlight. Maybe, it's hard to tell. It seems like I'm moving this guy more often than I'm moving this guy. The scroll wheel for the Superlight is extremely smooth. I enjoy it a lot. Same with the Viper V2 Pro. It's a little more stiff though on the Viper V2 Pro, where it's a little softer on this guy. When it comes to middle click, this guy is excellent for middle clicking, mild pre and post travel with kind of light to moderate actuation force. With the Viper V2 Pro, I actually think it has better middle click with even less pre and post travel and light actuation force. It's excellent. I can press it wherever I want to make it actuate. I can do the same thing with the Viper or with the Superlight as well. So I would say both of the scroll wheels on these guys is excellent. I can't really declare a winner for either one, which I know is kind of a cop out, but it's one of those that they're both just so good that it really comes down to personal preference. And I think no matter which one you go for, you'll like it better. I almost want to say a smidge goes to the Superlight, as I think more people would enjoy this scroll wheel over this guy. But again, it's going to be a mix up. So declaring a winner on this one is going to be really difficult. Spec wise, 100% easy win goes to the Viper V2 Pro. When it comes down to personal preference on how they feel though, I think I'm going to have to give the point to the Superlight, just because I think more people that I've read enjoy the clicks on the Superlight and say they are the end all be all and just prefer mechanical switches. So I think I'm going to have to give the feel in general to that, but according to my copies and my personal opinion, I would still actually give it to the V2 Pro. But like I said, that's going to be one of those that dramatically varies from person to person. Moving on to the wireless, they both are using top grade wireless tech. The Razer has hyperspeed wireless, which is technically 25% faster. You can also use the dongle to pair two hyperspeed devices together, so you can use one dongle instead of having to use two dongles. Where with the Logitech, I don't think that they have that in effect yet, where you can use one dongle for two devices. I could be wrong about that, and also it's the wireless just isn't quite as good. But if I'm being honest, this is me splitting hairs. You're not going to be able to tell a difference between the wires for either one of these. So if I'm going off of specs, the Viper V2 Pro has better wireless than the Logitech, but I'm just going to call it a draw. Moving on to the polling rate, they both have 1000 hertz polling rate, so that's a draw. When it comes to battery life, this actually has 80 hours of battery life. This has 70 hours of battery life. So yes, on paper, it's one of those the V2 Pro wins. However, what people tend to forget is that the Viper V2 Pro is using optical switches, which means that there's a light on in both of these switches on all the time, which is going to decrease battery life because it always has a light on. The G Pro X does not have a light because they're mechanical. So technically I would say that the likelihood of the Superlight lasting longer is probably going to be higher, just because you're using optical sensors here. You're also using a lot nicer sensor that is going to be probably maybe less energy efficient. I don't know. I haven't actually tested that. So this one, it's hard for me to give a winner. However, I haven't tested the Viper V2 Pro long enough to really be able to get a good idea of what the battery life is going to be. So I'm going to give the win to the Logitech on this one. Moving on to the profiles. Technically, I want to say the Superlight has 3 profiles. This guy has 1 profile, so the win goes to the Logitech. They both come with a 2-year warranty. I've heard nightmare stories from both of these companies when it comes to trying to go through an RMA. So it's going to be a draw on that one too. Moving on to shape. They both have a right-handed symmetrical shape. With the Viper is very flat though, which is going to be kind of an issue, where the G Pro X has a lot more of a hump, which makes it a lot more comfortable. This is also more like potato shape than this guy. I would say in general, I find more people, the Superlight shape to be a safer shape that most people will like. It is one of those that you can use fingertip if you want. You can use claw grip if you want. You can use palm grip if you want. You can use, I don't know, some weird stuff for the G Pro and it would be just fine. Where when it comes to the Viper V2 Pro, it's one of those that the shape is really hit or miss, with some people absolutely loving the shape and some people really hating it. Don't see a whole lot of people coming in between, where with the Logitech, a lot of people, it's all over the board. So it's one of those that personal preference again. However, with this being a more safer shape, I'm going to give the win to the Logitech over the Viper V2 Pro. I also think that the coating that they use on the Viper or on the Superlight is going to be a little bit better. It's kind of like rubber matte material that is kind of grippy, but it will also get shiny in time, where the Viper V2 Pro is more of like, also kind of, it's more plasticky, but you still kind of have a matte rubber grip to it. it's hard to explain the texture of the Viper V2 Pro. I like it better than the original Viper. It's definitely improved, but it's one of those that I think, again, the win for the coating is going to have to go with the Superlight compared to the Viper V2 Pro. But I think the coating wise is that one it's hard to judge a winner as well, because they're both very similar and both really comes down to personal preference. Moving on to the cables. This comes with a wired SpeedFlex cable, which is very flexible. I'm not going to pull it off because it's connected to my PC. I don't want to show it to you for 5 seconds. And I've got my G Pro X one buried somewhere. It's a huge, trashy rubber cable. It's the absolute worst cable that I've ever seen come in a mouse, especially one that's supposed to cost $160 for a mouse and is a flagship mouse that's one of the best on the market. Comes with the worst cable I've ever seen in my life. Kind of blows my mind. And it's also micro USB, which is a bummer, where this guy has USB-C. So all around, easy win to the Viper V2 Pro here. Has a better cable, USB-C. Yeah, so easy win. Moving on to the buttons, also another tie, as this one has 5 buttons. So 1, 2, middle mouse click, and then the 2 side. This one has 1, 2, middle mouse button, and then 2 on the side. However, this one has a slide on off switch, where this one you hold the button to turn it on and off, which is a unique experience and makes it feel a little more premium, just because there aren't any other mice on the market that I'm aware of that you hold the button to turn it on. They're all slide switches, so that's just something unique about this one. But this guy also has a DPI button where you can put DPI on there and change DPI on the fly. That is completely missing on the Superlight. So the win is going to go to the Viper V2 Pro on that one, as you just have more capability there. Moving on to the PTFE Feet. Both of them are 100% PTFE. Again, it's one of those, the Viper or with the Logitech, they are very, very, very thin. It's one of those, like, you can barely even see it, where with the Viper V2 Pro, it's also pretty thin, but you can actually see it stick off a little bit. At least in person you can. It's kind of hard to see. When it comes to smoothness, I would say the Viper V2 Pro on my glorious XXL mouse pad is a lot better than with the Superlight, as you can just see it not gliding anywhere near as much or as easy. But I would also say that this huge hole here is an issue, where if you're pressing really hard on the back, your mouse pad can actually get into that, could cause a little more friction. If you use a puck, the annoying thing with that is that it's held in magnetically and that it actually tilts the puck up and down. So it's one of those that can cause extra drag and make it feel a little bit different. So with this being flat throughout, I would say, again, objectively, I think the Viper V2 Pro is going to have a better slide experience across the board compared to the Superlight. Moving on to price, the Viper V2 Pro is $149.99. However, if it was post-COVID, it would have been probably about $130 instead, but with COVID and increasing costs, it's $150. With the Logitech G Pro X, it's $160, where it normally would have been $150, but there's also some more to be said here as well, as this is a brand new mouse that is built from the ground up and has completely new components on everything, better switches. I think the mouse encoder is the same, a lot less weight, way better sensor. It's one of those that this actually justifies the difference cost to the Viper Ultimate. You can check out that video on the screen or in the description below if you're curious about the differences there. But with the Superlight, the difference from the G Pro to this was the same, except for the weight loss mod, as same sensor, same, pretty much. I think you had upgraded feet, and weren't really any upgrades for this guy. This guy has also been out forever, where Logitech makes their own sensor in-house. So it's one of those that the hero sensor is on every single one of their mice. So that's not a big cost component. This mouse has been out for a while, so the shape is no longer as expensive to make. So it's one of those, this is just, people complain about this cost all the time, and I just don't think that it's justified if you're not including the Superlights, as the Superlight has no reason to be $160. Literally no reason at all to be $160, other than the fact that they can get away with it. At least with the Viper V2 Pro, it's a brand new mouse that has top of the line specs that are the best on the market. So it's one of those, like, it's a little more justifiable. $150 for a mouse is a lot of money. So I'm not saying that isn't the case, but I think the price is just more justified for the Viper V2 Pro. However, I guess you could say that this guy is power play enabled. So it's one of those, if you have one of those mats, that you can use that to charge your mouse at the same time, and you actually have a place to put in your dongle, where that is missing on the Viper V2 Pro. However, I'm still giving the win to the Viper V2 Pro for a lot of different reasons, as I just mentioned, over the Superlight for the price. Moving on to, are they green compliant? Yes, both of these companies are now green compliant, which is nice. Moving on to Reflex compatible. The Viper V2 Pro at this point is not Reflex compatible. I would expect that to be coming in the future, as the Razer Viper Ultimate, the Death Adder V2 Pro, and the Basilisk Ultimate are all that way, so I would expect it to be, but this guy is Reflex compliant or compatible or whatever you want to say. So the win obviously goes to the G Pro X there. Moving on to some of the other things that I haven't mentioned. This has on-mouse DPI control that we mentioned, Razer Hypershift, which means if you wanted to use one of these buttons, it would essentially double the amount of buttons that you have. It has a unique on-off switch. It has asymmetric cutoff, smart tracking, motion sync. Razer Synapse, I think, is a superior software over the Logitech G Hub, because the Logitech G Hub is complete and utter dog trash. I'll show you it here in a minute. It is so bad. I hate it. It has an improved dongle that allows two 1000 hertz devices on the same receiver, and it has a more robust, better wireless, where the Logitech G Pro is PowerPlay compatible, can't hide your puck, and it has the click tensioning system, and then of course lame Logitech G Hub. So I'll give you a little quick exploration of both of those softwares really fast. So ironically, as I was trying to launch G Hub, it actually crashed my computer. So strike, will just let that be noted for the record that G Hub also crashes things. So here we are. Here is G Hub. It's got a nice sleek look to it. When you click Superlight, you can change the sensitivity and adjustments of the different clicks, and then it does have G Shift, which is like Razer's Hyper Shift, and that's about it. You and then to like change the memory profiles, you have to go into other settings. It does show you how much hours are approximately left on your charge, which is nice, and that is pretty much G Hub. It's horrifically laid out. I hate trying to change anything on anything because it just doesn't make sense. Things are really complicated and it tends to be extremely limited. Hate this software. Absolutely hate it. Moving on to Synapse. We've got Synapse going into the V2 Pro. You have your different buttons. You can do your hyperspeed multi-device pairing right there. Going into performance, you can change the DPIs, and then it shows the colors. You can change how many stages you have, the sensitivity stages. You also have XY. I think you have that in G Hub too. Then you can change the pulling rate. For the calibration, you can turn on and off asymmetric cutoff if you want, and then also adjust the lifting and landing distance. And then you can also adjust the power saving modes. So, and then you also have other things that this software can do of looking at different accessories and profiles and studios and macros and all the things. So it's one of those that I definitely like Synapse a lot better. It's gotten a lot better over the years. It used to be really buggy and crash things. I haven't had any issues with Synapse probably for the last 2 years. So definitely give the win to Razer Synapse there. Anyways, that is going to be the end of this video. It's one of those that I personally think the Razer Viper V2 Pro is going to be the winner for me. I think it's the superior mouse on a lot of different levels. However, the G Pro X is still no slouch and is an excellent mouse as well. You can't go wrong with either one of these. It's really going to come down to whatever you tallied. I wasn't actually keeping track on which one won what. So maybe if during my editing, I'll do that and I'll add a little tiny black screen right here that explains that. I would love to hear which mouse you decided on in the comment section below and why, as I love to have that type of discourse with my viewers. Anyways, like, dislike, share, subscribe if you'd like. Otherwise, I will see you and your beautiful face on the next one. God bless and peace out.